This Sunday, of course, is Easter, the holiest day in the church calendar. It's really a bigger festival even than Christmas, so most people don't experience that way. But today let out all the stops, figuratively and literally, if you're an organist. It has vigils and baptisms, candles, processions, banners, marching choirs, blaring trumpets, all in a sea of flowers. But oftentimes it all seems just a little bit off. Is this over the top worship really the point in itself? A lot of it, of course, is done out of nostalgia. Even worshiping Christians will often put more focus on the eggs and the bunnies, candy, brunches, and dinners. There's a sense that the churches are trying to convince themselves that this is a big deal without really being sure why. This past week, I read a pastor's newsletter Easter message. Let me quote a little bit of it. For all the volumes that have been written explaining the Christian faith, our message is quite simple. Christ is risen. Death is conquered. God in Christ has won the eternal victory over death. It would be wonderful to understand how God accomplished this, but the how does not matter. Christ is risen, and ours is but to accept and celebrate. Alleluia. Now, that kind of message is one that countless pastors have given over the years, have given this year. It's one that I've probably given at one time or another. It may be meaningful for genuinely unquestioning church members, but frankly, there's fewer and fewer of those. For most people, a statement like that is really just words, church talk, if you will, without a whole lot of content or meaning. One reason statements like those don't work anymore is because they just don't make much sense. Many churches will begin their worship service with the hymn, Jesus Christ is risen today. Listen to a few of these verses from that hymn. Hymns of praise then let us sing unto Christ our heavenly King, who endured the cross and grave, sinners to redeem and save. But the pains which he endured, our salvation have procured. Now above the sky he's king, where the angels ever sing. Now these are obviously ancient words. Redemption from sin and salvation doesn't have the impact it did in the Middle Ages. And how he can be above the sky where the angels sing no less is pretty hard to understand. And yet this hymn and countless others like it are still being sung in the church today. Now, a common response to that criticism is that, well, it's poetry. They're metaphors and symbols. But metaphors and symbols for what? Today in the modern world, not many people are sure anymore. With the result that Easter is mostly celebrated as the arrival of spring, the rebirth of plants, flowers and eggs, and yes, bunnies. I've never quite understood where the Easter bunny came from, but that's part of the tradition as well. And for many people, that's where Easter stops. Because otherwise, to take Easter and resurrection seriously in those terms require that we're returning to an ancient flat earth world with God up in the clouds somewhere. But the other problem with this message is that I think it's frankly wrong. To repeat, our message is quite simple. Christ is risen. Death is conquered. But I don't think that is the Easter message, nor do I think it was Jesus' message, the gospel as it was called. Because it's not that death is conquered, but in fact, that death is embraced. Paul got this. From last week's video, I quoted his letter to the Corinthians. We proclaim Christ. Raised in glory? No. We proclaim Christ crucified. Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him raised in glory to heaven. No, Jesus Christ and him crucified. Why all this emphasis on crucifixion? rather than resurrection? Because for Paul, it shows the way to life. He writes, "Now personally, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." Who is the I that's crucified? It is, in our language, Frank, the ego, an imaginary self created in our mind, our scheming and fearful mind that never stops, it seems. And why is this self so restless, agitated, afraid? Because ultimately it knows it will die. That when the body dies and when the brain stops, our imagined self also will come to an end. Death, in that sense, cannot be conquered. It's like saying we've conquered air or rocks, but it's simply a part of reality. All reality, what science calls entropy. Everything ultimately is falling apart. It is by clinging to that self that is ultimately falling apart that, of course, we create so much of the frustration and misery we know in life. Whatever we build up will inevitably someday come apart and fall down. And that's why so much of what Jesus teaches and what so much of religion in general teaches is that we learn to live by letting go. It's the reason Jesus says we must lose our life in order to find it. We have to lose our imaginary self to find our true self. And what is that true self? Well, it really is nothing less than God, which we call spirit. In the Genesis creation stories, the Spirit blows over the waters of chaos, and thus begins the six-day creation. And in the second chapter of Genesis, God takes the earth, the mud, which in Hebrew is Adam, and blows into it, blows God's own breath to create the living human being. The 20th century philosopher and geologist Teilhard de Chardin said, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." Jesus says when asked, "What are the signs of the kingdom coming?" He responds, "No, the kingdom's not coming. The kingdom's already here. It's among you and within you." It's the reason he tells people whenever they are healed, not that he has accomplished something, but it's your faith that has healed you. Because God is present already in every person. The Easter experience, I think, was really the disciples coming to the realization of that truth. That yes, Christ was still with them because Christ has always been with them and with all of us. This message, this good news of the kingdom, as Jesus calls it, came to a life in them when they realized that they always and already have God's presence within them. I think that's really the message, the meaning of resurrection, then and today. It is awakening to the God within us and discovering at that same moment a peace and a love that again has always been present, but which has been hidden. When it comes to life, we are indeed reborn. Easter blessings to all of you. Thanks for watching.